It's my 1-year BookTube anniversary. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton, and yes, I have been on BookTube for a full year, and so I thought I would celebrate that by doing an AMA and Ask Me Anything, and I got a lot of great questions, both submitted to some videos I made and to my community page and also in some emails, and the goal is to go through as many of those questions as I can. So what I've done is I have organized them into kind of 4 main categories. The first category are questions about me becoming Buddhist and becoming a monk and moving to India and so forth. So anything that's kind of monastery or Buddhism related, those are first. And then questions that are somewhat personal questions but aren't about books necessarily, that is the second group. And then questions that are about books, some personal, some just general questions that are book focused. And then lastly, questions that are about BookTube. So those are the 4 categories that I have kind of lumped all these questions into, and I'm just going to go through them like that. But I thought it would be good to start with actually explaining what the name of my channel is, where it came from. You know, my channel is named Reading from the Depths, but it also, the address or the tag is Iraq and Samsara, and those both are kind of the name of the channel. So where did those come from? In Buddhism, we understand samsara to be the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, this continual cycle that is out of our control, that is born on the winds of karma and delusion. So we could say it's a cycle of suffering. It's a cycle that we are hoping to be free from. And the problem with most sentient beings is that we don't really understand what brings about happiness or what brings about suffering. And so we run after suffering and grab it with both hands and claim that this is happiness. And as a result of that, we just keep suffering over and over and over again. And that is what we call samsara. So we want to be free from that, ideally, right? That is the goal, is to free ourselves and all sentient beings from samsara, from this cycle of suffering. So with that in mind, there is a particular genre or type of meditation that I am really attracted to. It comes from 11th century Tibet, let's say, and it's called Lojong, or mind training meditation. And the point of Lojong is to really look at self-cherishing and to defeat the ego, to defeat the self-cherishing mind, recognizing self-cherishing as the cause of almost all of our suffering, and therefore engaging in really fierce tactics to uproot the self-cherishing mind. And there are a number of great prayers and practices that come from that tradition. One of them is a prayer I translated along with a friend of mine, and the author is someone named Kacha Nyeshe Gyaltsen. He's an 18th century Tibetan meditator and scholar, and the prayer is called "A Crystal Mirror Clearly Revealing My Faults." And so every verse of this prayer, what he's doing is laying out what the ideal monk or student would be like and how he doesn't live up to those expectations. And then usually he's asking his guru to have compassion on him, and he's kind of berating himself for being such a poor excuse of a student. And there are a lot of really great pithy lines in that prayer. I think my favorite one, I don't remember the context, but the last line says, "Oh Guru, please have compassion on me, this one who shaved his head just so he could fill his belly." So it's like that, right? It's really looking at all of your weak spots and saying, are you really engaging in a spiritual practice for the right reasons? Or is it your self-cherishing mind, is it your ego that is guiding you one way or the other? And there's one verse in that prayer that says, "Lacking mindfulness, introspection, and conscientiousness, I have strayed from ethics. Lacking renunciation, I have forsaken the path of liberation. Whatever actions I have performed have been exclusively under the power of delusion. Therefore, Guru, look with compassion on me, a rock in the depths of samsara." And so that really spoke to me, in part because I think engaging in pop culture is a useful way to engage in a spiritual practice. I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive, but it is easy, if I'm lacking mindfulness or conscientiousness or introspection, to allow that pop culture just to be an excuse to feed my delusions, right? And say, oh, no, this is part of my spiritual path. But really all I'm doing is, digging myself deeper into samsara. And so since I've created a whole YouTube channel that is about engaging with pop culture, I thought reminding myself that I am firmly seated in the depths of samsara and doing my best to see what I can make out of this, right? How can I make meaning out of this continual cycle of suffering, and how can I try to find a way to free myself and all sentient beings from it, and not pretend it doesn't exist, but say, this is the situation that I'm in, how can I make the most of it and use it to my and others' benefit? So that is where the name comes from. Reading from the depths and a rock in samsara. So we're reading from the depths of samsara together, trying to find our way out, hopefully. The other thing I thought I would just explain to people, in case they haven't heard it, is at the end of each of my videos, I say, go slowly. And that is a very strange thing to say. And that comes from, it's a Tibetan thing, not really a Buddhist thing so much as a Tibetan cultural thing. So Tibetans, whenever you have any kind of stress in your life and you ask for advice, the first piece of advice they're going to give you is kale, kale. That just means slowly, slowly, right? Go slowly. Kale, kale. Do things slowly. Just relax a little bit. Leleche is the other one. That means relax. So that is a common piece of advice. And then when someone is leaving, right, when someone's going away, instead of saying goodbye, a kind of formal way of saying goodbye is you say kale pe, and that means go slowly. And their response to you is kale shu, which means remain slowly. And so I just thought that was a really kind of profound way of being in the world, that when you take your leave from me, just go slowly. So that's where that comes from. It doesn't really make a lot of sense if you're outside of that cultural context, but it kind of sticks with me, and it reminds me of my teachers who are constantly telling me kale kale. So it, brings a part of my spiritual lineage into this kind of foolish booktube thing that I do. Okay, so getting those out of the way. Now moving on to the first set of questions that have to do with me finding Buddhism and me becoming a monk and moving to India. There are a number of questions in that regard, so I'll just give a quick answer that kind of combines a number of questions first, which is how I found Buddhism, how I became a monk, and how I moved to India. There's a much longer version of the story. I'm going to do my best to condense it. The short version is I grew up in New England, in central Massachusetts. I grew up in a family that went to church every week. I was very active in my church. It was an Episcopalian church. I started singing in the choir at 3rd grade, and I was an acolyte, which is to say an altar boy. And then I was a head acolyte for a number of years, so I did all the training and all the scheduling and all those things behind the scenes. I read lessons during church services. I was an active part of the youth group. I did all of these things, and I never believed any of it. And not only did I never believe it, I didn't think anyone else believed it either. It wasn't like a judgment. It was just more like I thought this was a place people went to be seen and to see others. And all of these other things that were going on the sidelines, the actual faith part of it, I didn't think anyone believed it. And I have no doubt that it was projecting on my part regarding the other members of the congregation. But my experience was that this all just seemed like a social gathering, and that no one actually believed in any of this. That was just a pretense for this kind of, socio-political exercise. And so because of that, at first, I kind of thought of religion as quite benign, but then I started getting cynical as I became a teenager, an angry teenager, and I started seeing the kind of politics and humans behind religion. And at that point, I didn't really have the wherewithal to distinguish between religion and religious systems, right? Or religious institutions and religious practice, or those kind of distinctions, right? So it all was lumped together for me. So I became quite cynical, seeing some of the behind the scenes thing about different people being moved into different positions of power, some people being forcibly retired, others being replaced, just it felt very worldly. And so as a teenager, I got the impression that religion was all about control and domination, and there wasn't really any benefit to it. It was all about either showing off or maintaining some sort of social status or controlling others. And so because of that, as a very angry teenager, when I went off to college, I had the mindset that I will study religion to prove how wrong it is, right? Which is an awful, awful motivation to do anything. That kind of cynicism doesn't benefit anyone, but that is where I was at when I was 17. Now, at the same time, in somewhat exact contradiction to that, at the end of high school, a good friend of mine died, or someone that was important in my life died. And I realized that I didn't have the language, like the emotional language, to navigate his death and to navigate my feelings regarding his death. And that was really hard for me. So when I went to college, on one hand, I wanted to prove religion wrong. And on the other hand, I was missing something in my life and I didn't know what it was. And so those were kind of pulling me in opposite directions. And by chance, I took an introduction to Buddhism class my first year in college. And it was just an overview class. Like it wasn't specific about any one particular type of Buddhism, but it felt like coming home to somewhere I didn't even know I had left. And everything fell into place. And so then my second year of college, I had an opportunity to live in a house of students who were dedicated to studying Buddhism and Buddhist meditation and practicing. And then my third year in college, I was in charge of that house. And so I started bringing in many teachers from all different Buddhist religion traditions and getting them to give teachings and lead retreats and give meditation instruction. And myself and other students were leading meditation instruction. So all of this was kind of building up, building up, building up. And then I graduated. And when I graduated, I have undergraduate degrees in theater as well as in religious studies. And in theater, creatively, I'm focused mostly on lighting design, or I was focused mostly on lighting design. But I did more technical theater and stage managing, and anything that could happen behind the scenes is something I was doing. And I was working as a theater technician, both for my university, where I'd been working for 4 years, and for some professional theaters as well. And I convinced my university to create a full-time position for me as the assistant to the master electrician. So I worked full-time at my university for a year after graduating, doing just theater tech work. And at that point, I decided I thought I would look into going to grad school. And I didn't know if I wanted to do a PhD program or not. So I thought I'd get a master's program a master's in religious studies, because my mindset was, well, that will only be 2 years. And if I like it, I can roll it into a PhD program. And if I don't like it, then I can just be a theater techie full time. And 2 years isn't, it isn't a lot of time wasted. So I applied to a number of different master's programs, traditional masters of religious studies or masters of Buddhist studies programs. But the one non-traditional program I applied to was at Harvard Divinity School, and that was the Masters of Divinity program. And a Master's of Divinity is not quite the same as a regular Master's in Religious Studies. The Master's of Divinity is meant to train ministers. It was originally started as an alternative to seminary for non-Catholics. And as it grew in scope, what Harvard especially realized is that training someone to be a minister means training them to use their own religious understanding and their religious experience to engage with the world and to be of service to others. So they reckon they weren't teaching you your religion, they were teaching you how to use your religion in a meaningful way. And therefore, they opened up their program to non-Christians as well. And I knew someone who had gone through that program. One of the teachers I'd invited to my undergrad to teach, I knew he had received a Master's of Divinity. So I knew they accepted Buddhist students. So I applied to go into that, not really realizing what that difference is between a Master's of Divinity versus just a regular Master's in Religious Studies. But I got in and I ended up going there, and things kind of, spiraled out of control from there. So I trained to be a minister essentially. And while I was there, I had met my root teacher and I was studying with him, both directly and indirectly. And I was working at a Dharma center that's outside of Boston, doing a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, a lot of programming things, giving introductory level teachings of meditation and very introduction level teachings to Buddhist Dharma in general. And when I was about a year away from graduating, I went to my teacher and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't really want to go into a PhD program right now. I see a lot of the kind of games you have to play in academia, and that didn't interest me. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. And he looked at me and he said, you become a monk and you go to Sarajay Monastery and get your Geshe degree. And as soon as he said that, I knew it was the right thing to do. And, at that point, I was in a long-term relationship. I'd been with my partner for, I guess at that point, almost 9 years. And yet I knew that becoming a monk, which is obviously meaning being celibate, was what I was supposed to be doing. And so I told my family and I told my partner, and everyone was incredibly supportive. Everyone was basically like, yeah, of course what you're going to do is become a monk and move to India. That makes sense, because they had seen my growth, right, ever since I started practicing Buddhism. And so I continued, I stayed in America for about a year longer, just wrapping things up. And then I moved to Sarajay Monastery, which is in South India. So Sarajay Monastery is one of the great academic seats, so-called, in my lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. So Tibetan Buddhism has 4 lineages, or 4 denominations, you could say. The oldest being the Nyingma, and then the Kagyu, the Sakya, and the Gelug being the newest. It started in the 15th century. And so I'm from the Gelug lineage. And so we have these 3 main monasteries out of these academic monasteries that were based in Lhasa. And Sera, Drepung, and Ganden were those 3. And so they all had relocated into exile after 1959. And so Sera has 2 colleges, Sarajay and Saramay, and that is in Karnataka in South India. And so I moved here in the end of 2011, and I ordained in January of 2012, and I've been here since. Now, the Geshe degree or title is what I'm working towards. And basically, it is a degree that recognizes a deep and a long exploration of Buddhist philosophy. And at Sarajay, the whole thing takes about 25 years. You can do it in 19 years. Generally, it takes about 25 years. The other monasteries that offer that same title don't take quite as long. Sarajay is the longest. And, the joke is Sarajay Geshes say, well, obviously we're smarter because we studied it longer and in more depth. And the Geshes from every other monastery say, well, obviously the Sarajay Geshes are dumber because it took them 25 years to do what we did in 20 years. So, there's always a little bit of friendly rivalry. So that's where I am. I'm in my 13th year right now, so I still have quite a ways to go. I'm just a little bit past the halfway point. Here at Sarah, everything is in Tibetan language only. So when I was in grad school, I did study both Sanskrit and Tibetan, and Sanskrit has been helpful in some translation work that I've done, but my everyday, day-to-day is all in Tibetan. So everything I do is in Tibetan. All of my studies, all of my conversations, everything is Tibetan language only. And now, since I am here, I am studying full-time, but I do also teach Buddhism, mostly around India as well as in the States, sometimes online or sometimes in person, just depending on where it is and depending on my schedule. I also do translation work kind of as a side project, just for fun in my free time. So those are the kind of extracurricular things I do, is that I teach and I translate. Hypothetically, once I finish here, what I will do is teach full time, most likely in the US, though that's so far away in the future that I don't really have plans for it right now. But that is most likely what it's going to happen, because there are so few Westerners who have trained, to this extent or have done this level of in-depth training, who can then teach in such a way that doesn't need any translation. And I don't just mean language translation, but also cultural translation. So most likely, I will return to the US. That's what I've been advised from a number of different teachers, that I finish my degree and then I return to the US and then I can teach there. But that, again, is a dozen years in the future. So we'll see how it goes. The next question was, what does a typical day look like for you? So I'm a little bit uncommon. For the normal monk, at our monastery, memorization is really, really important. You have to memorize your entire textbook, and you have to memorize, hundreds of pages of prayers. You should have all of this at the tip of your tongue right away, all the time. And I'm really bad at memorization. So most monks wake up between 5 and 5:30. You have about an hour of memorization in the morning. Maybe you take a break for breakfast, and then you do some more memorization, then a little bit of study and review. Then we have class, and then after morning class, then you'll have afternoon break. Maybe you'll have private classes in the afternoon, and then in the evening you'll have evening class, and then after evening class you'll do more memorization on your own, and then more study and more research, or preparation on your own. Now our classes, the main pedagogy at the monastery is debate. So if you ever go on YouTube and search for Tibetan monks debating, you'll see what we do. It is this quite intense physical activity, and the point is that you are studying whatever philosophical topic you're on, and one person, the person answering in the debate, has to make a statement, like make a truth claim about some sort of topic, and the person debating against them has to try to prove them wrong, has to get them to contradict themselves. And so it can get quite physical, it can get quite heated, and the point is you have to understand the minutia of these philosophical ideas and be able to defend your position against any sort of attack. And so that's the main pedagogy, is uses debate. And there's no one overseeing your debate. Your classmates and you just debate together, and you build off of your classmates. Now, to supplement that, we do have private classes where you go through the material, through the textbooks that we're studying, and every monastery has their own textbook written by their own scholars, and you go through that material word by word with teachers in private classes. And in those private classes, they'll bring up different doubts. When you're discussing any given philosophical topic, what are some of the doubts? What are some of the ideas about this topic that other Buddhist schools believe, or that non-Buddhist schools believe? And how can you defend against those ideas? And what is the logic that upholds your position and defeats the opponent's position? And so you'll go through the textbook kind of line by line and present typical doubts and debates, but then you have to bring all that to the debate courtyard to synthesize it in such a way that it becomes meaningful to you, as opposed to just words in a book, right? So the point of debate is to put you in a high pressure environment where you are forced to make sure that you really understand this material, and not that you can just parrot it very simply, right? That you can understand it from all sides and all directions at once. And so that is the main kind of pedagogical method. And that is what our day is focused around: debate in the morning and debate in the evening, and then private classes to supplement during the afternoon, and then with memorization time in the morning and the evening to memorize the many hundreds of pages of prayers and textbooks and commentaries and root texts that we are expected to, have a mental library of. That is what my normal day looks like. Now, on top of that, I do have my own meditation practice and my own kind of spiritual practice that I do that mixes in and finds its way around the cracks of all the things that are expected of me as a monk here at the monastery. And that goes into the next question: how do you have enough time for your Buddhist practice, and particularly meditation, every day? And then how much of your day do you spend in meditation? And I don't spend a lot of my day in meditation, but I spend time in the morning and in the evening doing my own personal practice. And that involves reciting different prayers and doing different specific meditations, and then doing other general meditations as well. So I do have time in the morning and the evening where I focus on those, and those are my priority. But really, one of the ways of understanding meditation, in Tibetan, the word for meditation is gom. What gom means is to become familiar with something, okay? And when you're meditating, what you're doing is becoming familiar with your mind, right? You're becoming familiar with what is going on inside, right? And so, for instance, if you're meditating on compassion, the goal of meditating on compassion is to make your mind indivisible with compassion, so that at any given point, you will always have an active mind of compassion that is navigating your behavior, and that is you use as a lens to view the world, right? So you're making yourself inseparable from compassion by becoming familiar with it. And when we study, what we're doing is we're engaging in study in such a way as to tame our minds, as to make our minds familiar with this philosophy and with these ideas and with this understanding of the world, with the understanding of reality that is taught at the heart of Tibetan Buddhism. So, Tsongkhapa, who is the founder of My Lineage of Buddhism, says, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says in one of his more important texts, that if you say now is a time for study and now is a time for meditation, you're wrong, because you should always be doing both of those at the same time. So I try to make everything I do part of my meditation practice. right? It may not be a formal practice where I'm sitting on a cushion and focusing on one particular object, but when you have an expansive idea of meditation as a way to tame your mind and to make your mind familiar with any given topic, whether it be familiar with itself, or whether it be familiar with your emotional landscape, or whether it be familiar with a philosophical idea, any of these things, then you can transform all of your actions into spiritual practice and into a meditative kind of practice. So my formal meditation, I have sometime in the morning and sometime in the evening, but I try to incorporate meditation into everything I do throughout my whole day. That way I can try to make everything I do part of my spiritual practice and not a worldly practice. Next question is, what is your favorite part of the day? I really like the mornings when things are quiet. The monastery is not quiet. My monastery, so Sarah J and Sarah May, like I said, they're two colleges of Sarah University, if you think of it that way. Between the two of them, there are about 5,000 monks, give or take, at Sarah. So we're a small town, and maybe 1 square kilometer. And I live in a house with about 30 monks, some of whom are quite young. I think the youngest is 5 years old, and I'm one of the oldest, though my teacher is older than me, and there's one other monk that is a little older than me. And as I said, there's a lot of memorization. And when you do memorization, that means reciting out loud. So at any given time, even now as I record this, there are monks 20 feet away from me just reciting at the top of their lungs different prayers. And so it's not quiet at the monastery. It's very little quiet. But if I can get up a little bit before everyone else, then I get a little bit of space of quiet, which is very nice. So I think my favorite time of day in that regard is the morning, when it is quiet and it is quite beautiful and pleasant. Do you need special permission from the monastery to do your BookTube channel or BookTube content? I don't. I don't know that the monastery knows that I have a BookTube channel, but I don't need permission as long as I am following the regulations of the monastery, both what it means to be a monk. As a fully ordained Buddhist monk, I have 253 vows that I have to follow. And so the monastery obviously expects me to follow all of those. And then the monastery has its own series of regulations on top of those. And so as long as I'm following those, then they don't have any problem, right? And what I'm doing with BookTube is, even though reading books and engaging in BookTube is kind of a worldly practice and is engaging in pop culture, I hope to be doing it in such a way that I am incorporating spiritual practice into everything I do. And so I'm bringing that to people, right? I'm sharing that with the world. And I'm sharing that not all Buddhist monks look alike, and that you can be a practicing Buddhist and still be engaging in worldly things, and they don't have to be dissonant all the time. And so that way I am spreading the Dharma, hopefully, in a good and helpful way. So I don't think anyone in the monastery would have any objections to it in that regard. Next question. Are your students monks or lay people? For the most part, lay people. I do have a few monks here at the monastery who I give instruction to and advice to once in a while, some formally, some informally. I am the second most senior Western monk at the monastery, so some of the younger Western monks, a younger meaning how long they've been at the monastery, not necessarily age, but some of the younger monks do ask for advice and instruction, whether it be in the material that we're studying or just in life as a monk in general. So I did some advice and instruction to monks in that regard, but that is quite informal. So my main students are lay people. So when I teach, my main teaching right now is in Bangalore. So Bangalore is a big city in Karnataka, and there's a Dharma center there. And I go there at least once a month, usually twice a month, sometimes more. And I give teachings there. And all the students there are lay people. So the majority of my students are lay people. And then the last question in this category, what is my advice for someone struggling to maintain a meditation practice? The truth is, what's most important is consistency, right? And so if you're going to start a meditation practice, don't worry about doing 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour every day, but worry about meditating every day. That's what's most important. If you can do 5 minutes every day and do that for a month, do that for 2 months, that may seem insignificant. It may seem like you're not doing a whole lot, but what you're doing is creating a new habit. You're creating a habit that allows you to create the space where you know this is my time for meditation, right? You can also, depending on your circumstances, try to set a space off in your house or in your room that you only use for meditation. So like, don't meditate on your bed. Don't meditate on your sofa in front of your TV or in front of your laptop. Try to have a space, if you can, that is set aside just for meditation. So your mind knows, I'm going to this place to do this thing. And if you can create a practice of even just 5 minutes a day, that consistency is what's most important. And then once that consistency becomes ingrained, then you can expand your practice. You can do different types of meditation. You can do longer meditations. But just having consistency is really important. And so don't worry about length in the beginning. Worry about every day. Doing it once a day or twice a day. Ideally, you should do it in the morning and the evening is kind of best, because then once you build up your practice, what's really useful in the evening is to not just do mindfulness practices, but do analytical meditative practices that analyze all the events of your day to say, the things I did throughout the day today, were they living up to my ideals as a spiritual practitioner, or were they not? Was I led around by my self-cherishing, my self-grasping, or did I actually engage in spiritual practice throughout my worldly activities, And so every day being able to do like a look back, an analytical type of meditation, which looks at the events of your day, is really helpful. So consistency is most important. Try to do it at the same time, in the same place if you can. Don't worry about length. Worry about consistency, and that is the best advice for someone that is struggling with their meditation practice. But also, don't stress out, right? Relax. Kale, kale, go slowly. Okay, moving on to the next set of questions. So these are kind of personal questions, but that aren't necessarily book related. So the first one, do you have any serious hobbies other than reading, such as gardening, cooking, hiking, etc.? I knit and crochet. Those are the main hobbies I do now, and I've been doing that for decades. I've been crocheting for decades, probably about 3 decades. My mom taught me how to crochet. She also tried to teach me how to knit, but failed miserably, and I couldn't do it at all. But maybe a decade ago, a little less than that, I taught myself using YouTube. So now I actually do more knitting than crochet. Since I've been reading more and more, my crochet and knit has gone down. But now that I've started doing more audiobooks, I've picked it up again. So those are my main hobbies. I do like to cook and bake, especially before I moved to India and before I became Buddhist. Actually, I was vegan. And so I got really into baking. I even made a small cookbook. And so I would bake a lot. I really enjoyed baking for people. And it's amazing how much joy you can bring people just by giving them baked goods. It's really profound, actually. And so I did a lot of baking. So I really enjoy baking. Here in the monastery, I don't have an oven. The ovens aren't a big thing in India. It's more stovetop cooking. So I really don't have the opportunity to bake that much. And that's good. It'd be a big distraction if I did. And also gardening. I enjoyed gardening for a while here. I made a rooftop garden, and I even built a small little greenhouse, and I had like 24 pots. But then we decided to build up another floor on our house. So I no longer have a flat roof. We have a peaked roof. And so my garden went away. So I don't really have a garden opportunity here, but I do enjoy gardening, and I do enjoy cooking and baking. I just don't have the opportunities for it here at the monastery. So instead, handicrafts, soap making, crochet, and knitting, these are the kind of things that I do have time for and I do enjoy doing outside of reading. Do you listen to music while reading? What kind of music do you prefer? I don't listen to music while reading. I've tried. And I've tried to listen to music to supplement my reading, to make my reading, more robust. Music that was in theme with the reading, whether it be active music or vocal music or ambient music or all these things, and it never added to my reading at all. I think in part I'm so used to engaging in practice, whether it be study or meditation, and tuning out the world because there is so much ambient noise around me all the time, that when I listened to music and read at the same time, I just tuned it out. Didn't matter what it was. So I don't listen to music when reading, because if I do have music on, I just literally tune it out and don't pay attention to it and focus on the reading instead. In general, I do listen to music once in a while. I don't have as much time for it as I'd like. I do listen to music. I listen to all types of music. As I mentioned in the beginning, I started singing in a choir when I was in 3rd grade. And so Western classical music I do really enjoy, but I really like all types of music, and most of the music I listen to these days is some derivation of metal music. So the louder and more aggressive the music is, that's probably what you're going to find me listening to. But all music I do enjoy. It just depends on my mood, but never while reading. What are some things you enjoy doing in India? I'm going to be honest, I don't do a whole lot in India. I live in my monastery, and I very rarely leave my monastery. All of the things to do in India, I don't really know about them. I leave my monastery when I have to go to the hospital, or when I have to go to appointments, or when I have to do other kind of business like paperwork or government things. And so I don't really know what to do in India. I visited India first when I was an undergrad, and I spent 6 months, not here in Karnataka, but in Chennai, which is the capital of Tamil Nadu. And I was studying all different things there. And then I traveled from there all the way to Kochi and then back again as kind of a holiday, but doing very touristy things. Anything you would find in a tourist guide is all I know of India outside of my monastery. Really, India for me, unfortunately, everything I do is so dead. All of my time is so focused on study and practice here at the monastery that you get used to living in India and all of the obstacles that come with living in India, but you don't really have the opportunity to celebrate living in India and to celebrate the incredible diversity and opportunities. So I don't do much in India, unfortunately, except happen to live here. Do you have any book recs for someone who is feeling lost? So this is a book rec, but I felt like this is more of a personal question. Lost. What do we mean by lost, right? Lost can mean a lot of things. What I would recommend for someone feeling lost, there are a lot of great books, but I really would recommend Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot Duology, A Psalm for the Wild-Built, and A Prayer for the Crown-Shy. And that is because those books, both they're novellas, so they're quick, they're really easy to read, but they focus on friendship, on finding yourself, and on being of service to others. And it's just really heartwarming in that way. So if you're feeling lost at any point, I think those are really wonderful books to read, just because they're pleasant to read, but also they offer insight on what it means to be in relationship with yourself and with others in meaningful ways. What intro to Buddhism books do you recommend for a curious layperson? You know, I haven't read any English language Buddhist books for over a decade, so I'm not really great at answering this, and I'm asked it quite frequently. What my answer is right now is anything by His Holiness Dalai Lama is a good place to start. Most of his books are actually talks he gave that were then transcribed and edited and made into book form. So they're very personable and they're very easy to read. And they run the gamut from all different topics. Some obviously are more advanced topics, but there are many, many introductory level topics. What I would say right now is they just published the last book in a series, a 10-book series that he has written. And it's him as well as Venerable Pema Chodron, who is a Western nun. And so he wrote these texts and then she edited them together. And then they worked on them together. And it's a 10-volume series that covers all of Buddhist practice. The series is called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion by His Holiness Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, and Venerable Pema Chodron. And the first book in that series is Volume 1, Approaching the Buddhist Path. So that's a good place to start. Next question. How much time do you spend in the US every year? And when is my next trip planned? I don't spend a lot of time in the US. Here at the monastery, we only get one real holiday a year, and it's only about a month, and that is right around the Tibetan New Year, so around February, give or take. There is one other one-week holiday later in the year, after one of our exams. So those are our only actual holidays. The rest of the time, we are, 6 days a week at class, so we're busy. There are some down periods where you could kind of disappear for a week or two and not miss too much, especially after exams or after some really busy periods. Everyone just gets a little bit relaxed. And so sometimes monks will travel. Sometimes when I'm doing teaching, I'll travel during that period to go do some teaching in other parts of India. But I don't travel too often because it is full time, right? What we're doing here, and there isn't a lot of break. When I do go to America, I'd say on average, it's about twice every 3 years. That would be a good average for how many times I go to the US. The other thing is that, like I said, I live with about 30 monks and I live with my teacher here at the monastery. And all the monks I live with, they are actually from Northeast India, from a state called Arunachal Pradesh that's on the border of Tibet. And they're from a region called Tawang or Mun Tawang. And I've gone to visit their home twice. And each one of those is like a month-long trip. So if I go for a month to Tawang, then I'm not really going anywhere else that year. Like that's my whole allotment of free time is up there. And I have another, I was told just recently that I have another trip planned there for the end of this year. So, I wasn't planning on going to the US this year anyway. Last year, between January of 2023 and March of 2024, so over that 14 months, I went to the US 3 times for a total of about 18 weeks, about 18 weeks, because my mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer and then had a huge surgery, and I did all of her post-surgical care, and then I took care of her as her primary care during the death process. So I spent quite a long time in the US during that year, which actually overlapped 2 different academic years here at the monastery. And so because of that, I already wasn't planning on going back to the US this year, but now I'm going to Tawang at the end of the year, so I may not come back to the US next year either. I don't really know. I don't have to come back until 2027 to get a new visa, so I'll definitely be back then. If I'm invited back, if there are people that want me to teach somewhere, I might come earlier. But as of right now, it's up in the air. General rule of thumb is maybe twice every 3 years. Next question, dogs or cats? Right now I have 2 puppies. They are sleeping somewhere in this room. They're small little guys. I love both dogs and cats. I grew up with only cats in my house. And at one point when I was young, I think we had 5 cats. And you can, all indoor cats in a single family ranch style house in New England. So I'm used to cats. And in general, I think cats are less work, right? Just because you don't have to walk them and you don't have to do quite as much to take care of them. And so for that, I would say cats are probably first on the list before dogs. But I love them both equally. And like these dogs, I didn't get these dogs. Other monks in my house got these dogs. Then the dogs gravitated towards me because I'm the one that takes care of them the best. So I inherited both of these dogs. And I'm sure when I have a more stable living situation, the likelihood of getting dogs again in the future is very high. So I love both cats and dogs. I think cats are just easier to care for, and I like how mercurial they are, and I like the personalities they have, but I could say the same for dogs. So I can't pick a side. Sorry, I have to sit on the fence on that one. Except I will say that cats are generally easier to care for, so it's more likely that I have a cat. And then the last question in this category, what are the bookshops like in your part of India? Are there many new shops or secondhand stores, or do you mostly order online? And so there are really no shops where I live. I live in a very small, literally a refugee camp. and that's next to a small market town. But when I go to Bangalore to teach, then there are bookshops in Bangalore, and so I do visit them, and they are both a mixture. The ones I visit, at least, are a mixture of new books and used books, and they're all mixed together. So it's hard to tell which is which. You can only really tell by the price tag and then by the quality or the condition of the book. They don't often have different sections for new books or used books. They're kind of mixed together. And so I buy a mixture of used and new books. Right now, when I do go to the stores in Bangalore, I try to focus on buying used books. And then I buy new books online, occasionally on Amazon India, but more so now there is another website that is for a bookstore out of Delhi that does a lot of import books and has good prices on a lot of books. And so a lot of newer books that I need to buy, I'll buy from this store in Delhi, though I buy it online because Delhi's quite far from me. But then used books, there are a few really fun used bookstores that I visited in Bangalore, and I try to visit them almost every trip now. No bookstores around me, but that's good. It's better they're a little farther away. They're not as tempting that way. Okay, moving on to books in general and kind of personal questions about books. Are there any authors or genres you wouldn't read? Are there any you want to, but you haven't gotten to yet? So there are authors that I won't read for personal reasons. Basically, authors that have shown themselves to be harmful people in one way or another. And I'm sure you know a lot of people I'm talking about. And so I choose not to read anything by them. But other than that, I don't really have any boundaries. I read across all genres. I don't particularly like romance, and I don't particularly like police procedurals. I like mysteries and detective novels, but police procedurals and some that are in that kind of vein, really crime procedurals, I don't really like that much, but I don't have anything against them. And if there's a good one, I'll read it. And if someone recommends one, I'll read it. So I generally don't read those, but it's not because I have anything against them conceptually. They're not my preferred genre. I also, I guess, like really borderline smut. I don't really read a lot. I have read some, both queer and straight smut, and smut that has humans and smut that has monsters and weird other non-human entities as well. And didn't really do a whole lot for me. As someone who's living a celibate lifestyle, it doesn't interest me in any way. It doesn't titillate me. And so if about 75% or more of your book is focused only on, those kind of action scenes, those spicy action scenes, then there isn't really a whole lot there for me to read it for. So I tend not to read those either. I don't have anything against them. If someone said, hey, this book is really smutty, but it's really good, you should really read it, I would very gladly read it. That's usually not the case. What is a book or series that I'm confused hasn't gotten as much love or attention? I'm pretty basic in the books that I really enjoy. And I think most of these books that I was thinking about this question for a while, and most of them I think do get a good amount of attention, but just not necessarily in the corners of BookTube that I visit regularly. So I'll mention a few series, but I think they're all well known, just maybe not by my corners of BookTube, I don't know. So the first one is the Hell's Library trilogy by A.J. Hackworth. This is a trilogy of, I guess you'd say, urban fantasy. And the first one, the premise is it takes place in a library that's in hell. And all the books in this library are the books that never finish being written on Earth. And the librarian there has to, the books and the characters in the books kind of want to escape this library. And so she has to keep them all in check. And what I love about it is it's really beautifully expansive world building because you visit other libraries and other afterlives and things go wrong, as you can imagine. And it's just a really fun series that looks at the importance of language and the importance of reading and the importance of engaging in artistic endeavors. What does that mean for you as a person to engage in art in this way? So I really enjoyed that series. I don't hear it talked about a lot. Another series I thought was really fun, it's kind of basic, but really fun, was the Alex Verus series. This is, again, urban fantasy. These are by Benedict Jacka. I think there are 12 books in the series, and it takes place in contemporary London, and he is a mage, and there is a whole wizarding world that exists of dark mages and light mages, and so different mages have different types of magic that they're just born with, that it's not like you can train in one or the other. You're just kind of born with a certain type of magic, and so some are based on the elements, some are based on luck, some are based on time, and he happens to have been trained by a dark mage, but then he was betrayed by that dark mage, and he just runs like a local magic shop in downtown London, and he tries to stay out of the affairs of the black and white councils, but of course he gets drawn in. And that, any 12-book series is going to have some repetition and some rote, but they're really fun, they're really easy to read, and over those 12 books, the characters do grow and they develop, and you have new side characters come in, and some stick around, and some leave, and some break bad, and some become really important. So I thought it was a really well-crafted series. I've never heard anyone talk about them before. Another trilogy I really liked was Beneath the Rising by Premi Mohammed. These started as like this techno thriller in the first book, and then it evolved into this dark fantasy, eldritch god dystopian series that I loved. I thought it was phenomenal. So Beneath the Rising. And then lastly, the Beneath Earth and Sky trilogy by Rebecca Roanhorse is a fantasy series. It's an epic fantasy, but it's based in Native American mythology and culture. And I just think it's really expansive, and the world building is phenomenal. The character work is really great. And over these 3 books, the work she did exploring identity and exploring colonialism and expansionism and using magical systems and cultural ideas of magic to create this really expansive world and these really in-depth characters was just really beautiful. And in this trilogy especially, I think it's like a New York Times bestseller, or at least she's won some awards. So again, it's not really unheard of and unspoken of, but I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. So those are a few series I've really enjoyed that I don't hear a lot about. Next, do you read much in the way of comics or manga, and any favorites? I don't read a lot. I have read some. I read almost the entire run of Attack on Titan, and then I got into reading whenever there's a TV show announced. I would read those. So I read the whole run of Preacher and The Boys and Invincible and The Walking Dead. But other than that, I don't really have a strong draw to it. I like comics and I like manga in general. The problem is I don't like reading them on my computer because I don't like using that screen. And any of the handhelds I have are really too small to appreciate the art. And so whenever I do read them on a smaller screen, I find myself reading them way too quickly and not appreciating the art. So if I'm not going to be able to have them on a big screen, I want physical copies, but I don't really have the money to buy physical copies of comics. And so as a result, I don't read a lot of them. I will say one of the few that I've read that I really enjoyed that was never optioned for TV is a series that only had 10 issues, and it's called Bitch Planet by Kelly Sue DeConnick. And supposedly it was going to have a 3rd run, but those 10 issues were collected in 2 trade paperbacks, and that is marketed as Margaret Atwood meets Inglourious Bastards. And it is a play on the kind of women exploitation genre, where it takes place in a dystopian future where any women basically that rub the patriarchy the wrong way get sent to prison, but the prison is its own planet. And that is where the events take place. And that is where the story takes place, on this prison planet called Planet B. And I thought that was phenomenal, but it's only got 10 issues that are collected in 2 trade paperbacks. Then there was like one other trade paperback released that wasn't part of the main continuum, but it was like other authors writing their own stories in the world. And there was a 3rd story arc that keeps getting promised, but it hasn't shown up. And, it's been maybe 10 years or something like that. So I don't know if it's ever going to happen. But otherwise, I don't read a lot of comics or manga. I don't have anything against it. I'm not able to read it in a format that I can appreciate it, given my situation. So I don't read a lot of it. If you have any suggestions for things that really need to be read by me, that I really need to pick up, let me know and I'll see if I can manage it. Does any fiction do a good job of representing Tibetan Buddhism? No. I've never read representations of Tibetan Buddhism, whether it be Tibetans practicing it or whether it be Westerners practicing it, that feels at all like my experience, or at all lifelike. And I haven't really even seen it represented that often. I think when I have seen Buddhism or Buddhist ideas in books, it's always been some sort of pop Buddhism or very watered down ideas of Buddhism. But to be fair, that is how many people in America at least engage with Buddhist ideas, is with this kind of pop spirituality of like little, catchphrases that they might hear and they pick up and then they create their own meaning for. And so to some extent, I guess that's realistic because that's how a lot of people practice. There are a lot of people that maybe meditate every day and they focus on their breath and do a mindfulness meditation. And because of that, they understand themselves as being Buddhist, and for a long time as a new Buddhist, I was very, frustrated by this. I said, I'm not like them. That's not the kind of Buddhist I am. I'm a real Buddhist, quote unquote. And then I realized that was just my ego. And if you calling yourself a Buddhist because you do mindfulness meditation every day is helpful to you in your practice and it makes you a better person, then great. You can call yourself whatever you want. It doesn't have any effect on me or my practice or my life. So I think there are a lot of people in the West who practice little bits and pieces of Buddhism that they find, whether they find it in pop culture or whether they find it by going to a Dharma center or going to a retreat once a year or something. And so that I've seen reflected in fiction. And it's not my experience of Buddhism, but I think it is, an experience that many Westerners have. So in that way, I guess it's well represented, even if it's not the Buddhism that I want to see represented. But otherwise, actual Tibetan Buddhist practice, I haven't seen represented really well anywhere, at least in fiction. Do you have any favorite short fiction writers? I don't. I read a lot of short stories and a lot of short story collections, but keeping track of all the authors isn't something I'm great at. I will say I really like the editor Ellen Datlow, and that is not going out on a limb. She has won all these awards, and she's considered like the queen of dark fantasy and horror editing. She right now is the one editing the Best Horror of the Year anthology that comes out every year. I think there are 17 of them, and she also does specific anthologies. So I have an anthology that's all about psychological horror and all body horror and all eldritch horror and so forth. And every anthology I've read that she has done, I've really, really enjoyed. So I would say as an editor, I think Ellen Datlow is my current favorite editor or curator of short story collections or anthologies. But specific writers, I can't really give you any, unfortunately, because I read too many of them. And sometimes if I only read one story from a writer, it's hard to really get a gauge. What was the first fantasy novel you read? I had to think about this. I think probably the Chronicles of Narnia series and The Hobbit. I read both of those when I was quite young. I don't remember which one came first, but my guess is it would be one of those two. If I'm thinking of like actual fantasy, it would be probably those. And I never finished the Chronicles of Narnia, interestingly. I think I read the first 4, maybe, but I didn't continue. And obviously, I continued after reading The Hobbit. I continued with Lord of the Rings, but not too much later. There's a big gap. But so that would be my introduction into fantasy, is one of those, either Chronicles of Narnia or The Hobbit. Are there any books you gravitate towards during certain times in your life? Not really. Obviously, my preferred genre is horror, and then sci-fi and fantasy after that. And then I kind of read, especially queer fiction in general, are like where I focus a lot of my energy when I, especially looking for new books. And horror is my comfort zone. So there isn't any specific book that I read, but I do lean into horror when there's anything going on that's like dysregulating in any way. And especially I'll lean into Stephen King just because he's, the author he's the first adult author I ever read. I started reading Stephen King when I was 10, and it was the first adult fiction that I read. And it, was a big milestone for my reading and also just my understanding of how like novels could work. And so since then I've read every book by Stephen King. I say that. I don't think I've read all of the hard case crime books. There are 3, right? There's Later, Colorado Kid, and Joyland. And I don't think I've read Colorado Kid. I have it. I don't think I've read it, though. So I've been telling everyone that I've read every book by Stephen King. I don't think that's true. But I've read almost every book by Stephen King. And his writing is just so comfortable and it's so familiar that it's very easy to fall into it. Even the books of his that I don't like a whole lot, I can still read them and they just feel very comforting, the chicken soup, quote unquote. So if there's anything when I'm feeling dysregulated anyway, or, unsure of things, reading horror is always helpful to me. And then reading Stephen King is always comforting. So I guess that's kind of the best answer I have for that one. What are your favorite books, authors, or genres as a kid? And how did you discover horror? What were the earliest horror books that you read? So the earliest books I really remember reading and being like really frenzied about were the Hardy Boys mysteries. And I remember as a young child having the original 50, which were all hardcover, like the classic iconic like navy blue hardcover. And then all the ones after number 50 were all paperback. And I remember having lots of them, over 100 probably. And I'd read all of those. And then I read Nancy Drew when I ran out of Hardy Boys. And I remember those really igniting my love for reading as a really young child. And then I quickly segued from there into horror. And I started reading Christopher Pike and R.L. Stine as a young kid. And this was a little bit before the Goosebumps. I don't think Goosebumps started until 91, maybe. And so when I was like 7 or 8, so I guess right around 91, I was reading, the Fear Street series by R.L. Stine, and then a number of different books by Christopher Pike, which are all of that like young adult, in between middle grade and young adult horror. And then the Goosebumps series came out, and that's middle grade horror. And once I found those, I started going through those like voraciously. I'd read 2 of them a week even sometimes. And so someone in my life, an adult who maybe is best not to be named, saw me doing that. And I'd read through literally all of the Goosebumps books. And he gave me my first Stephen King book. And he said, here, you should read this instead. And he gave me Misery. So I was 10. And so I read Misery when I was 10. And then the next book I read was Gerald's Game. Neither of those books are even close to being appropriate for a 10-year-old. But for me, they were amazing. And they really cemented my love for horror and for reading. And they made me feel like an adult, which I wasn't because I was 10. But they made me feel special, right? To be able to read these books and to get something out of them. And then I read It very shortly after that. It is like the biggest comfort book I probably have. If I have to pick one book, it's up until this year, I haven't done a lot of rereading. This year, I've been focusing on rereading some favorite books of mine. But before this year, the only book I've reread multiple times is It. I read it once when I was 10, once again in high school, once after college, and then most recently, when the new films came out, I reread it again. So I've read it, I think, 4 times. And it's the only book that I've read that many times. But so just reading those as a young child was really meaningful to me. It gave me a sense of self-esteem that I didn't really have otherwise. So those were the books that made me love horror, especially. The gateway would be Christopher Pike and R.L. Stine, but then they went right from there to Stephen King. The next question, do you have a favorite Stephen King novel? I guess I'd have to say it. I don't think it's his best novel, but it's the one I've read the most, and I really enjoy it. So, and I think it really shows off how much he cares about character and his ability to look at childhood and the importance of childhood and how that affects you as an adult, right? That's the whole premise of it, going back and forth between these two timelines of how your childhood doesn't stay safe and it escapes into your adulthood, and how the benign neglect of adults can be terrifying and can be world shattering as children, and how that can have long lasting repercussions, right? And so I think he really leans into that in a way that really shows off what he's good at and what he's, the whole kids on bikes concept of genre. I think he leans into it in that novel. And yeah, it's overbloated, and there are scenes that people don't like. I think they work in the context of the book, but I understand people don't like them. And it shows off King likes to ramble. But, obviously we all get it from somewhere. But if I have to pick a book, I'd say that. It's not his best book, but it's the one I've read the most that I keep coming back to. So, what's the silliest book you've read? I don't read a lot of comedy or humor. I do read some satire, but not a lot. I think my favorite satirist is Kurt Vonnegut, but that's not saying much, right? Because everyone loves Kurt Vonnegut. Recently I've been on a kick reading Adrian Tchaikovsky. I think I've read 8 of his novels at this point, and his one of his new novels, Service Model, is specifically like humorous. It's meant to be humorous, and his other novels aren't. But I think they're really funny. I think his wit is really, really great. I just finished reading Children of Memory, and there are these characters that are these crows, these sentient crows, and they're always in a pair. And just the way they talk to each other is really, really funny. And he is able to insert really humorous, dry, snarky humor amidst this epic world building and this sci-fi drama that he's created. And so that's the kind of humor I really enjoy, is that it's not in your face humor, but it's just little snarky one-liners here and there littered throughout the book. It may be from one character's point of view, or it may be from the narrator, right? Just like little addendums that the narrator comments on as they move through the book. But that I think actually his humor really lines up with my own. So as far as non-humor books that I find really funny, I think his humor is there. As far as actual humor books, I don't read a lot. I do read satire. I think in addition to Kurt Vonnegut, Chuck Tingle's newest book, Bury Your Gaze, is, I guess, a horror supposedly, but I didn't read it as a horror. It felt like a really great dark satire to me, and I thought that was really funny. I think Needful Things by Stephen King is really, really funny. Again, a really dark satire that it has the cloak or the trappings of a horror novel, but it's actually really, really funny, or I thought it was. Maybe watching a town descend into madness isn't your idea of a good time, but I thought that was also really funny. But I don't read a lot of traditional humor, so that's kind of the best I got. Can I show off my personal library or bookshelves? No, unfortunately I can't. I've talked about it. You can see a little bit behind me. In front of me, which you can't see, I have a whole wall of books. Those are all Tibetan language books. Those are the books I study. Some of them are primary sources that are, from ancient Indians that have been translated into Tibetan, or commentaries on those, and others are more contemporary, either commentaries or just treaties, contemporary treaties in general. So I have maybe 300 or so Tibetan language books that are all in front of me. You can't see. Behind me, you can see 1 or 2 shelves of books. For a long time, I didn't buy books, physical books. I don't really like owning things. I don't have a strong desire to own anything. There is a whole me being a monk, right? I own physical books of the Tibetan books because they're hard to get copies of. And when you're studying them, having a physical copy that you can write in is really helpful. And they aren't printed regularly. So if you see a book, sometimes there are certain books that when you see a printing of it, there may be 1,000 of them printed. So I tend to buy them just so I can have them as reference. With fiction, I don't like to have things. Things that I don't need, I don't want. So I read mostly digital books. But then in the last couple of years, I realized I wanted to be able to share books with my family, especially, and with friends. And that's hard to do with digital books. And I was really inspired by, there is a podcast I listen to about Stephen King, of course, called The Kingcast. And with every guest, they ask, what is your Stephen King origin story? And a lot of people mention how they first came across Stephen King by seeing some of Stephen King's books in their parents' bookshelves, and they were inspired to read it. And that is what set off their love for Stephen King. And so the idea of having bookshelves that my nibblings, my nephews and nieces, can see, whether it's Stephen King or any other book, these are books that I like and would like to share with them or with my siblings or with anyone else. Just that idea, I think, is a kind of a very romantic idea of the power of reading and the power of having relationships with family and friends. And so I started collecting physical books for the sole purpose of being able to share them with others. So these are the bookshelves you see behind me. There's two more you can't see, but they're the same very tall, skinny bookshelves. Other than those, once I read a book, it gets off that bookshelf and gets put in a box until I can take it to America, and it goes on a bookshelf in America where other people can read it. So my bookshelves are in constant disarray, and they don't have any of the organization that I would like them to have, that they have in my heart. They're just kind of chaos incarnate, and it's kind of the best I can do given the situation. I guess that goes into the next question. How do you balance audiobooks, digital books, and print books? So for most of my books I read are digital books. I buy print books of books that either I've already read them and I know I really liked it, but in that case, I won't buy a copy of it here. I'll probably have a copy. I'll buy it in America and have it sent right to my sister's house where I stay when I go visit America. Or books that are authors I really like and I know like they're my buy no matter what. Those books I'll buy and have here. And so those are the only physical books I have. Everything else, I get digital books, either from the library or I buy them, depending on if I know I want to read it or not, like that. And I don't have any balance between those two. Like I'm very much a mood reader. I have like general piles of possibility and TBRs that I follow, but whether they're physical books or digital books don't play any part into that. And then audiobooks, I just started reading this year, and they are like a little bit of chaos in my life because all the audiobooks I read, I get from the library. And so I put in holds for books that I'm interested in. And when they come in, they all of a sudden get put to the top of my TBR and I read them. When you're getting books in the library, you're at the whim of the library. And sometimes you might get a book right away. And sometimes you might have to wait 3 months before you get a book, just depending on the popularity of the book and how many copies they have. I don't spend a lot of my time reading audiobooks, but I usually will spend my lunch break reading audiobooks. And I can't really do too many other things when I'm reading an audiobook or listening to an audiobook, depending on how pedantic you want to be. If I do too many external things, then I get distracted and I have to re-listen to it. There are some chores I can do and some small things I can do that don't take any of my mental energy that I can do while listening to an audiobook. So right now, audiobooks don't take up a lot of my daily practice, but usually at lunchtime, I'll have some audiobook to listen to. And maybe when I do like my evening chores and my evening like cleaning up, things like that. Next, do you read books with political or social messages you don't agree with? I mean, to some extent. I mean, my politics are quite radical leftist, right? So anything that isn't socialist, abolitionist politics are not going to be politics I agree with 100%. So the majority of books that are written, they're not like anti-capitalist books or, books written by Angela Davis. They're probably not going to be politics I agree with 100%, even if they are liberal or leftist. And so those I read, though I do agree with them mostly. As for books that are like wildly different than my own social or political opinion, I'll read them if they aren't just kind of nonsense propaganda. If they are books that have an argument, that they make a coherent argument, that they make respectfully, and they are trying to, actually introduce thought into political discourse or social discourse, whatever it may be. I'm definitely willing to engage those. Any good faith writing on whatever topic, I'm willing to learn about it. And it might change my position. Like my positions are not fixed, right? I'm willing to move my position based on the information I get. It seems most books these days aren't like that, including books on the left, right? Most books are borderline propaganda and they aren't in good faith. And so I don't really get a lot out of reading them. I don't have any interest in rage reading a book. If I know that it's going to be a lot of nonsense that I don't agree with and that it isn't going to be well supported, it's just going to be diatribe and propaganda and half-truths, then I don't really understand. There'd be no benefit to me reading it. So I'm not against it, but there aren't many that I do, not that often. Do you separate a book's artistic merit from its message? I suppose so. It depends. There are definitely books that are really beautifully written that I don't agree with conceptually, or I don't agree with everything they talk about. I read a lot of really dark, horrific novels that have really awful characters. And sometimes those characters are celebrated. So obviously I don't agree with that, even if I appreciate the book. As far as like authors I don't agree with, there are some authors I don't agree with on small things, and there are some authors that I don't agree with on big things. And the ones I don't agree with on big things, I just don't read their books. I believe I have the kind of intellectual and emotional ability to read their books without letting my opinion of the author influence it. I just have no interest in doing that. Like, there are so many amazing books to read that aren't written by garbage people who spend millions of dollars to destroy lives and to take rights away from people. Why would I read their books? Or books that, aren't written by sexual predators. Like, why? Like, there are other great books that are phenomenal. And it doesn't matter. Like, I can appreciate that certain authors who are horrible people have written really wonderful books. And maybe at other times in my life, I've read some of those books and enjoyed them. There are other books to read, though. So just because I can separate the author from the book they wrote, I don't really see a need to in those circumstances because there's other books to read. So it's something I can do depending on what I'm separating. I don't always choose to do it, you know? What is your favorite fiction book and why should I read it? I don't know. I don't know. This is I think I can't pick a book. Like that's not something I can do. I can say, especially for people that don't read a lot of horror, I think find a horror novel that is well regarded and you should read that. It doesn't have to be graphic, it doesn't have to be slattery, it doesn't have to be Stephen King. A lot of Stephen King books aren't really that horrific these days anyway. But find a horror book, one that is well regarded, and read that and push yourself. Only insofar as I think horror is one of the few genres. I mean, I think all genre fiction to some extent, but especially horror, is really giving you an opportunity to explore yourself in a meaningful way because you can take all of the things that are usually subtle and internal, and then the genre itself allows them to be exploded and external and manifest in ways that you can't do in regular fiction, right? Because you're bound by reality. And so horror lets you face the most terrifying parts of yourself that you don't want anyone else to see, right? It takes all of the dirty, hidden things and it makes them manifest. And I think that's really exciting as a reader and as someone trying to live in the world. So that's all I could say is I can't pick a favorite book, but I can say if you're someone who doesn't read horror, try to read horror. And there are lots of I won't say cozy horror, but there are lots of gateway horror books that you can read that are adult horror books that aren't too graphic and that aren't over the top, that do offer insight into the benefit of reading within that genre. Who is your favorite fictional character? Again, I read a lot. If I had to pick one right now, I would say Jade Daniels from the Indian Lake trilogy by Stephen Graham Jones. She's a pretty awesome final girl as far as final girls go. So I'd pick her. But that's a hard question. Come on now. And again, who is your favorite author of fiction? I guess I have to say Stephen King, right? But also right now, Stephen Graham Jones, I really am enjoying everything he writes. Paul Tremblay, Andrew Joseph White, Mira Grant, I'm really enjoying her books right now. I could go on and on with a bunch of authors that I think are doing really good work right now. I just finished a book by River Solomon earlier this month that I really enjoyed. So I can't pick one. I think Tananarive Due, there's a lot of contemporary horror authors that are just doing phenomenal work, and a lot of them are coming from marginalized voices, but not all of them, but a lot of them coming from marginalized voices, and they're really looking at what horror can do as a genre, and that's really exciting to me. So yeah, I don't have a favorite. If I had to choose one, I'd say Stephen King, but that's really boring and lame, and really right now his contemporary books aren't as exciting to me as other new contemporary authors, but his back catalog is such an integral part of my childhood that it's hard not to say that, right? So yeah, that's not a good answer. Sorry. What book are you looking forward to most on your upcoming TBR? I think the series I'm looking forward to most is the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson. It's a 10-book series of epic fantasy, often called Shakespearean fantasy, and I really want to read it. Right now, I'm reading Robin Haugh's Realm of the Elderlings, and that is a 16-book series. I just started the 7th book, and I kind of want to finish that series first because having multiple series that are that long running simultaneously just seems a little exhausting to me. So I'm going to finish the Realm of the Elderlings, and then once I do, I will be starting Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I'm really excited to pick that up. So that is what is my most anticipated series. The last question in this category: have you ever totally dropped everything you're doing to read a book that was recommended from a sub? I haven't dropped everything I'm doing, but I've definitely read books that were recommended pretty much immediately. A big part, again, due to the randomness of audiobooks from my library. Just recently, I saw, it weren't from my subs actually, but I saw a review of a book, and I went and it was available right away from my library. So I read it the next day. I started reading it. And so there have been a few. In general, when I'm really interested in a book, I will put it on my TBR, and then we'll see when I'm in the right mood for it. My TBR, I have this quote-unquote TBR. It's more of a real pile of possibilities, and it is always growing and always expanding, but it really just exists as a place for me to look for inspiration, and because I'm much more of a mood reader. And I have projects that I'm working on and I have series that I want to complete, but it's really just what am I in the mood for? And so my TBR doesn't exist as anything that's written in stone. It really just exists as a way for me to have a collection of books that I know I'm interested in. And so there's been occasion where I've been recommended books either by my subs or I've watched reviews of books. And for one reason or another, they jump to the top of the TBR. And it doesn't really disrupt things because nothing is set in stone that way. But sometimes, it just depends. So yeah, once in a while. Really, really coherent answer. I know. Okay, the last topic about books and BookTube. First, how long do you typically contemplate a book before you make a video review? It depends on the book. Usually, whenever I read a book, I'll write a review, usually within a day. I like to give it a little bit of time to think about, and it depends on like how heady the book is and how intense it is and how much I really want to think about it before writing a review. But I'll write a review usually within 24 hours. And then for a video review, it could be right away or it could be a week or a month afterward. It just depends on the book. But when it's more than a few days afterward, I'll always have my written review that I'll look back at to see what my like initial response was to the book when I first read it, because that written review is usually written, like I said, within 24 hours. And then I'll see if my position or my thoughts have expanded or changed in any way in that time frame, whatever it is. So it just depends on the book. Books that I receive ARCs for, if I don't read them far enough ahead of time, then there's a pretty quick turnaround because, there are deadlines when you receive copies from different publishers or from authors. They usually want you to release reviews more or less within the time frame of a week before or a week after of the book's release date. So if I haven't read the book well enough ahead of time in my schedule, then I might have to do a review the same day I finish a book. But generally, it's a couple days after finishing it. That gives me time to write a review, which lets me organize my thoughts a little bit, and then it gives me time to think about it a little bit more. Then I make the video review. And then I edit furiously and reduce half of what I made into a video review into something that goes online. Of the videos you've made up to date, which is your favorite? I think my favorite right now is, I really enjoy doing reviews of series. That's fun. I think my favorite videos right now, though, are my Buddhist Path and Fiction series. I haven't done as many of them as I wanted. I've kind of trapped myself into a format that is not exactly as open as I want it to be moving forward. But those are the videos rather that I really enjoy, where I do really deep dives into books, where I show off my way of doing what I call deep reading or intimate reading, where the book itself is just an opportunity for me to learn something new about myself. And it's a way that I try to engage with all the books I read, where one small thing in the book might lead to a whole different series of thoughts, or different rabbit holes that I go down philosophically or spiritually or whatever it may be. And so I try to show off some of that in the Buddhist Path and Fiction series. And that's a series I hope to continue and expand upon in the future going forward. Right now, it's kind of locked into a format that I created for myself. So I want to finish this kind of mini project I set up for it. And then once I get out of that, I'll be a little more free-flowing, I think. So those are the ones I enjoy doing the most. They take the most work because I have to take really detailed notes of the books I'm reading, and then all of the work that I usually do, like second nature when reading a book that is all internalized, I have to externalize it, which is really good for the practice of reading, but it just takes a long time, right? What's the most fun BookTube related thing that's happened to you in the last year? I think easily buddy reads. I've never been part of a reading group or a book group or anything like that. And since starting BookTube, I've done over a dozen buddy reads, just personal buddy reads, not group buddy reads, but personal buddy reads. And those have been really, really meaningful to me and a lot of fun. So I'm really enjoyed those. And then I've done a couple of live streams on other people's channels, not on my own. And I enjoy those because when you're in conversation with someone, it's so much easier than just looking at this camera and talking and trusting that there's some sort of audience. So when you can engage in dialogue with anyone, regardless of what you're talking about, that's just a lot more fun, right? And so that's been a lot of fun being on other people's live streams. Plus, all the live streams I've been on have been on other people's channels, not my own. And that is just so much less stress, right? Because I just have to show up. I have to be present. I don't have to worry about any of the behind the scenes. I don't have to worry about the audience present. I don't have to worry about anything except being myself. And so I always have fun when I'm on live streams on other people's channels. And now the last very few questions. I know. I'm sorry, you guys. It's gone on long. I know. I apologize. What were your expectations starting this channel? Have you met them? What are your expectations or hopes going forward? And what lessons did you learn in your first year? I'd say I didn't really have any expectations going into this channel. I knew that I wanted to focus on reviews. I wanted at least 50% of my content, if not more, to be reviews. And that is one of the main reasons I started this channel. And I also knew going into it that channels that focus on reviews don't have high subscriber counts. Just that's not, where subscribers flock to. And so I didn't have expectations to have a lot of subscribers. I didn't have any expectations for how well my videos would perform. My only expectations were for myself, and that I wanted to create at least 2 videos a week. I just kind of set that as a goal for myself, and I wanted to make videos that I was happy with, right? That I was proud of. And it isn't to say that they are perfect. I don't think any of my videos are perfect, but I'm happy with what I put out in terms of intellectual content, right? And so that was my only goal. And so I didn't really have any big hopes or expectations for the channel or for the channel's performance. It was more about for myself. And so I feel like I've met those, and I feel like I've made some videos that I'm proud of. And so going forward, I just want to continue with that, not focusing on the numbers, not focusing on any sort of performance metrics, but focusing on my ability to make videos that I'm happy with, streamlining my process of making videos so I'm more comfortable making them so they don't take up as much time, and I can still put out videos that I think are worthwhile, right? That is the goal. And so that's my only expectation going forward. I may not even stick to 2 videos a week if I get too busy. There's a chance that I may do less. I don't have any strong expectations going forward, except that I want this to continue to be fun. It's been a real fun year, and so I want it to keep being fun. And the lessons I learned, I suppose, are that I don't know if it's really lessons I learned from BookTube, but lessons in my life that I apply to BookTube, which is that not everything has to be serious, right? And you have to be able to take things in stride. You have to be relaxed, and you have to be open-minded about things. And what you expect to work on BookTube, what you put a lot of energy into, may not get any reception at all. And another video that you threw together without really thinking about it may take off, and who knows why. And so if you're too tied to the outcome and you're not appreciating the process, then that's kind of missing the point for me. And so the lessons I took from it is that I want this to be a fun process. I want this to be an opportunity for me to engage with community, for me to share my love for reading and for literature, and for being in groups of people who also share that love, that I have something to offer to others, and that there are things that I can receive from others as well. And as long as I am helping foster a space where that is possible, then I think that I have succeeded. It doesn't matter how many subscribers I have, doesn't matter my view count, none of that matters, as long as I'm able to meet those very minimal goals of being part of a community and doing it in such a way that I'm still having a good time. And so I guess what it comes down to is kale kale, just take things slowly, right? Be relaxed and go with the flow, essentially. And with that, that is my last question of this marathon Q&A. It's been a wonderful 1 year on BookTube, and I look forward to many, many more years. And thank you so much for anyone that has watched any of my videos, that has wasted any of your precious human rebirth listening to me drone on about anything. I can't tell you how much it means to me to know that there are people that are willing to spend their time, listening to whatever nonsense comes out of my mouth. I really do appreciate it. I really do appreciate all of you. And thank you so much for making this such an incredible experience for me. I look forward to continuing in the future. But for now, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.